This is The Toss-Up, where we take a look at some of the topics facing the world of college sports and give a little bit of the history behind some of them. We're not trying to change your mind. We just want to dive deeper into the topics that keep you tuned in to the teams you love. Inequality in sports is almost undeniable, whether it be the way in which female athletes are treated on the field or the way they are treated off of it. There's almost no conceivable way to make a comparison to the coverage of men's sports. According to data collected between the years 1989 and 2014 in a 25-year longitudinal study of gender in televised sports news and highlight shows, researchers found that female athletes are actually covered less in the media now than they were in 1989. In 2014, only 3.2% of network television coverage was given to women's sports, and SportsCenter only ran 2% of their coverage around women. Now, some may argue that it's not the job of the media to cover women's sports simply because it's the right thing to do. The media has to cover what is popular for the viewer. But this is where we have our problem. Women's sports are as popular as ever. According to FIFA, more than 750 million televised viewers watched the FIFA Women's World Cup in Canada in 2015. In fact, the championship game of that tournament was the most watched soccer match in U.S. history. Thanks to Title IX, we have millions of female athletes and their sports are growing immensely. The interest is statistically there, but the question remains, why isn't there the coverage? With women's basketball dominated by powerhouse teams such as the UConn Huskies, women's tennis dominated by one of the greatest athletes of this generation in Serena Williams, and women's soccer fueled by superstars such as Alexa Morgan and Carly Lloyd, why doesn't anyone ever talk about them? Does there need to be a change in the way we cover women's sports? And if so, how? Tyler, what about you? What are your thoughts on the matter? Now, I'm glad you mentioned that, because the reason I brought up this subject in the first place is because I was watching the Women's Final Four, and I was surprised to find out that the UConn-Mississippi State game, one of the greatest games in women college sports history, was being broadcast on ESPN2 rather than ESPN, having NBA games being played on ESPN. I thought that was absolutely absurd. And so you bring that up, and you bring that up that it's degrading. Do you guys think that the problem is sexist in nature? Is that the issue behind the lack in coverage? I certainly agree with that sentiment. Now, I think the last question I think is an important one to ask. Do you foresee a time when women's sports will be covered as much as men's? And if you do, is it anytime soon?
You know,
well, we've certainly acknowledged that there's an issue there, and it'll be interesting to watch moving forward whether there'll be proper changes made to the coverage and to even, like you mentioned, coaching involvement and involvement all around sports. But that does it for this week's show, and be sure to continue the discussion on our Twitter page at IUSTV Sports and on Facebook at IUSTV Sports. You can always give any suggestions for the show and ask any questions you might have. Toss it up. Find out if we'll catch it. Until next Sunday, be proud and cheer loud.